What's up guys, today I'd love to share with you a very simple system that I as a Grandmaster use to find plans in any positions in the middle game, even in blitz. For example, how would you play here if you were black? This is my game that I played, and it's a very common middle game situation where there are plenty of moves, they all seem to make certain sense, but it's very hard to decide which one is good, which one is bad, and how to pick the right one, alright? For instance, here, black can do a whole lot of things, like you can trade in the center, these pawns or those pawns, or you can decide to close the center here or here, maybe you wish to expand on the queen side somehow, or maybe on the king side, you can put the rook to this open file, you can maybe reroute your pieces to one squares or the other, like there are so many ideas. Therefore, how do you decide which move is correct? Alright, here's the system, and initially I'll break it down in three main components that you need to evaluate, because first we need to evaluate the situation, understand what's going on, and after that it will be clear which plan to pick. Now, again, I'll dive into details, but don't think that it's too hard. In reality, you can do this within seconds. Just to make it absolutely clear, I will initially go through step by step, trying to keep it very simple and understandable. Now, what do you need to evaluate in a position? Well, there are three factors. It is your king, your piece activity, and pawn structure, because that's all you got in chess. Now, how do you evaluate a position? Well, you just go through these three components. If we think about king safety for white and for black, do we see here anything special? Well, not really, both kings are safe. Then we move on to the next factor, piece activity. Here you wish to have a look at your pieces and inspect them. Think which ones are doing some useful job and which ones are not. And if someone is unemployed, you wish to find better ways for that piece. For example, if we think about this queen, I mean, it's standing pretty well. I don't see any way for using it more actively at this point of the game, so I'd say it's okay. How about the rooks? Like this rook stands on a potentially open file if we start trading pawns right here, so I'd say it's fine. This rook on a8 is totally unemployed. That's really bad. By the way, just like a government, you gotta fight unemployment. For instance, if you are from States, the current unemployment rate is 4%. So you can use that as a benchmark. If you have more than 4% of your pieces to be unemployed, there is something wrong with that. You got to fix that. With the rook, we clearly have a problem, and that's something we will need to address. All right, how about this bishop on g7? Not doing anything at this point. Maybe in the future we can reroute it somewhere here, because bishops love open diagonals, just as rooks love open files. Therefore, we need to look for those open diagonals for a bishop. So potentially in the future, we may consider this maneuver. All right, how about this knight? Well, it's putting pressure down here to this pawn, maybe to this central pawn on d5. So I would say it's doing a nice job. How about the other one? Well, here the situation is worse, because it does not really have legal moves, really. I mean, you can sack here, but it doesn't make sense, or you can go back, but it doesn't make sense either. So for the knight, I'd say there's a problem, because all these squares where it could possibly go to are already taken away. Therefore, for the knight, I'd say that, in the future, we also need to find a better place. Maybe some g5, knight g6 stuff, so that we can bring it forward. Something like this we may take into consideration. Alright, so that's about our pieces. We have a couple of pieces which are good, like queen, rook, this knight, and the other three which are not very active, and especially the rook on a8, we would love to improve it. So that's about our pieces. Now, as for white, generally speaking, he's got a fine position. This rook also doesn't do much, the other pieces are fine. Now, moving on to the third factor, and the final factor, pawn structure. What do you want to evaluate here? Well, strengths and weaknesses, because if you've got strengths, you wish to capitalize on them, that's where you wish to attack. And if your opponent has weaknesses, that's exactly what you'll be attacking. As for the pawn structure, we can see that you're expanding here in the center and rather on the king side, therefore that gives you an edge there, some space advantage. So all things considered, you'd probably wish to attack somewhere there on the king side, because again, you have certain advantage over your opponent there. As for white, he's got space advantage in the center, also on the queen side. Perhaps he'll wish to attack somewhere there in the long run with c5 and break open the center, maybe the queen side. He'll try to attack there. All right, so that is about the pawn structure. Now, here's another important question, because as I talk through all of that, it may seem like, oh, there is so much that's so complex. Not really, because you gotta know the priorities. And here's a very important question. Out of three factors, which one is the most important? Now, there is a temptation to say that it is king safety, because if a king is checkmated, that's game over. But that's not really the case, because let me reformulate the same question in different wording. which factor has the greatest impact on the game? Which factor is the most dominant, the strongest? And that is clearly your pieces. Like your one queen, if we assume that it's worth 9 pawns, then your single queen is worth more than all your pawns combined. Therefore, your pieces are much more powerful than pawns, and they really dominate all over the place. That is why that is the most dominant factor, your piece activity, and that's what you should care about first and foremost. So out of 3, I'd say just care about pieces. Remember that unemployment rate, right? Make sure that all your pieces are doing some productive work, and you're good to go. With all that in mind, I decided that, okay, overall I wish to attack rather on the king side because I've expanded there, and I need to care about this rook and find a better place for it. Where do we move a rook? We wish to find an open file, or at least a file that potentially can be opened. And in this position, that is either the F file, if we imagine this trade, the F file may become open, or the C file, if we imagine this trade, right? The C file may become open. But since I wish to attack on the king side, I decided to reroute my rook right here. So I played rook f7, and on the next move, I wanted to move my rook to double rooks along the F file. And I understand that my explanations are lengthy, but this was a 5-minute blitz game. Therefore, in reality, you do this in seconds. Alright, at this point, white played pawn takes c6. How would you recapture this pawn? Well, we talked about before that one of our main ideas is to reduce our unemployment rate. And we talked about this knight, which was not doing anything. So I was pretty happy that now I can reroute it to a better square. And from here, possibly it can be even advanced further in the future. Now white played bishop e3, and then I continued with rook to f8. Also now it is easier for us because since we already know our plan and what are we going to do, then we just keep executing it for now. Okay, at this point white played queen d2, just completing their development. And what do you do next? Well, at this point, we know that we wish to attack on the king side. Okay, we decided what to do with our pieces more or less. And right now, when all of your pieces are more or less active, it is time to be pretty direct and to look for straightforward ways to gain advantage, which is to punch your opponent right in the face. So you're not looking for workarounds. You just wish to barge into his territory and attack him, put pressure. That's what you want. And those are the moves that you focus on. You ask yourself, how can I go into my opponent's territory and hopefully create some threats? So this is a really effective process because usually there are very few moves that would actually do that because most of that territory is controlled by white. Therefore, there are really very few options. So in this position, I can see the knight going there. It's not an attacking move, it does not create any threats, but at least we go onto his side of the board. There is this pawn takes on e4 and there is pawn f4. And the pawn f4 move I kind of like less because in this case we block the f file, which we were hoping to open up for our rooks. And of course it's very easy for white to just retreat the bishop, so that doesn't do too much for black. So I'd pick between pawn takes or knight to d4, just 2 moves, and quite often either of them is good, just as long as you follow this idea. Go into my opponent's half of the board and make something unpleasant for him there. So I chose to take here on e4, and after white recaptured, what do you do here? It's the very same thinking process. How do I go into my opponent's half of the board? Now we've got one more option. Besides knight d4, there is also knight g4. This square was previously covered by the pawn, and now it's not. So I just played knight g4, opening up this file, and possibly my knight is more unpleasant for white. White traded rooks. Now, do you recapture with a queen or rook? Which one would you pick? Well, there is a very helpful principle of the least active piece, which means that you always need to find which piece is least active and improve its position. In this case, the rook is already active along this file, the queen does not do anything, therefore we would love to bring the queen into play. The queen takes f7, now we've got heavy pieces stacked on the f file, there are no threats at the point, but anyway, in general, it already feels slightly uncomfortable for white. White played knight to d5. Alright, which moves would you consider here? Same logic, moves on your opponent's side of the board. Now, it's either knight to d4 or knight takes e3. I would say one of the two. Which move is better? Well, the OGs know that to take is a mistake, right? Therefore, knight takes e3 probably is a bit inferior compared to knight to d4, although both moves are fine. In the game, I actually violated my own rule. I traded on e3. But that's still fine. I mean, the good point about this whole strategy is that as long as you follow it, even if you pick suboptimal moves, you're still usually good because overall you're moving in the right direction. Now with this knight to d4, I've got this sudden threat of a fork, therefore this also happened to be an attacking move, which is nice. White noticed the threat and he played queen to f2. Now, would you trade here or not? What do you think? By the way, I didn't mention that the white player is Peter Nielsen, who is a very interesting person. He was coaching Anand for 10 years, and then he switched to coaching Carlsen, and soon after that, Carlsen defeated Anand in their World Championship match. So it's quite an interesting guy. Now, my idea behind the rule to take is a mistake is that you should only make trades when you realize what is the advantage that you gain from that exchange, or what's the disadvantage that you avoid, right, by doing this exchange. But you avoid exchanges for the sake of an exchange itself. And in this case, trading queens would not give black anything. That is just an equal trade. And generally speaking, we wish to attack on the king side. Therefore, we wanted to hopefully checkmate his king ultimately. And if we trade queens, that would only stop our own plan. Therefore, I played queen to e6, and now this opens up this attack to the queen. All of a sudden, there are not that many comfortable squares for the queen to go to. Because if it goes here, that would fail to, yes, knight to e2 fork. And knight is a very tricky piece. You see, it always has all these forks available for him. For instance, here it would be this fork. White noticed that, he played queen to d2. All right, which move would you play here? You can try to follow the same logic. I believe you can find the right move. Ask yourself, how can I go forward into my opponent's side of the board and make threats? Here it's queen to g4. Pretty much the only possible move that I can see, because everything else is covered. So it's the only move that follows this idea, and it's the best move. Here we create the direct threat of capturing this pawn, and also a more subtle threat, but also a more serious one, of knight to f3, taking advantage of the fact that the pawn is pinned. Therefore, knight to f3 would fork the king and queen, and would win the game. Therefore, white can't right now defend against these both threats, and he dodged this knight to f3 threat, but now I can grab this pawn on e4, which is cool. Whenever you can grab material, usually you should do that. It gives you that stable long-term advantage. Now I played knight c3 to kick the queen out, and the queen goes back. Now that also creates the threat of queen to f1 with the back rank checkmate. Therefore, white played h3. For example, if white were to play any other move, that would be this thing, which you sometimes solve in tactical puzzles, right? Now, here white played pawn h3 to avoid this. What would you play here? Again, you can see that it's super simple. Basically, there is only one move on your opponent's side of the board that attacks something. And that's the move pawn e4. I mean, theoretically, you can have a quick look at some other tactical opportunities, like queen takes h3, doesn't give anything. No, white just captures. Knight to f3, maybe more interesting. Hits the queen, and if white captures, maybe you can recapture one of the pawns, but still seems to be unclear. So e4 is much simpler and much more straightforward way, where you hit the knight, as well as you advance your passer pawn. Now you have it. It's pretty cool. And again, that's the only attacking move on white side of the board. The knight went here to b4. And at this point, I actually missed a winning sequence, so you may try to find it on your own. By the way, let this be our puzzle of the day. Please think about this, and if you can find the solution, write it down in comments below. While you're thinking, just a quick reminder that if you ever wish to achieve your chess goals faster, right now it is the best time to do so. There are still a few more days where you can take advantage of the special offers to celebrate my birthday. Recently I turned 37, yeah, getting older, and for a few more days, you can get any of my premium courses at a great discount, up to 70%. Plus, there will be 5 lucky winners who will win my Super Pack, the collection of all the premium courses I've ever created, worth $1,600 for free. So if you're interested, you can get all the details in the description below the video and find something that you like. Going back to the game, I missed the strongest move, but I played the second best move. Now, if you cannot find any attacking move on your opponent's side of the board, what do you do next? Well, you come back to the previous idea. You look at the pieces you have and you think of ways to improve them. You also pay attention to your least active piece. And in our case, we've got these heavy pieces doing a great job right here. The knight is very advanced. We only have the bishop that's not doing much. And so I played bishop e5 so that I potentially control this square. And, in the future, if I can reroute the queen to this diagonal, there could be some checkmating threats. Therefore, now all my pieces are active. So if you can't attack straight away, go back to the principle of the least active piece. White played knight to d5, but in this case, it's a good positional move to put a knight to the middle of the board, but it blunders a little combo. Queen to f1, this back rank checkmate still works because this time the bishop controls this h2 square, and that turns it into a checkmate. Here's another game. It is white to move, and you may think about this and try to pick the right move and the right plan overall. This time, let's do it faster. Let's do a more real-life situation where you need to make decisions quicker without going through like a lengthy process of assessing everything. By the way, I'm playing white here against Danielle. She is a woman grandmaster. She was in the top 10 in the world among women. Now, what do you think about this? We know that we need to fight unemployment. That's the very first task, because pieces are most important factor, and therefore we gotta care about them first. If we look at our pieces, which ones are doing a good job, which ones are passive? Like our queen is more or less okay, the bishop is standing really well, even though it can be traded off. This knight also is a decent placement. In the future we may advance it forward. This knight on e2 does not do anything currently, therefore definitely would wish to improve it, and usually wish to improve pieces by moving them forward or towards the center. So knight to d4 is probably a good idea. The rook on f1 is doing a decent job, not doing anything super productive right now, but at least it's behind this advanced pawn, so it has some space to operate. This rook on a1 is totally passive. That's the biggest problem that white has, the rook that is totally passive. And you can see that it's very common. Very often we develop our kingside pieces first and we castle kingside, therefore our queenside rook remains to be the only piece which hasn't played at all, and it is totally passive. So in terms of our passive pieces, we've got this knight, which we want to improve probably by moving right there, and I think that's exactly what I did, knight to d4. By the way, how about white's plan? There ain't any plan, because right now you're just dealing with unemployment. And that is also what makes your life easier. You don't always have to have a specific plan. If there are passive pieces, you definitely need to improve them, regardless of the plan you choose in the future. So knight d4, it attacks this knight, therefore black traded off and castled. What do we do next? We improve the rook. Where do we put it? To an open file, or at least to the position where it has some space, because activity is simply the number of squares that a piece controls. Therefore, if we wish to move it here, it's gonna do nothing. It's still blocked by the pawn. If we put it here, it's in the middle of the board, it is better, but it is cluttered by a bunch of pieces and pawns, and the rook here doesn't do anything at all. Therefore, we wish to put it right here, where it has some open space. Therefore, possibly we prevent black from jumping with the knight right there, because we can trade, or maybe we can use this rook lift to the king side potentially. Therefore, once we have that open space, squares where you can go to, you can later think about something more constructive with this piece. For now, we just activate it. At this point, black played queen a7. And of course, while planning and executing your plans, it's very important to ask yourself, what's the idea of my opponent? Why did she play there? Well, apparently she wants to attack along this diagonal, as my knight is a bit loose right there, and the king behind is also a little vulnerable, so I decided to just guard the knight and played queen e3. What is my plan? Still no plan. I'm just improving my pieces, and by the way, moving the queen forward is also a good thing, because overall we wish to move our pieces forward. Here black played bishop to a6. What do we do next? Now, when all of our pieces are active, it's time to think about the second stage, how to attack. By the way, a side question, should we trade here or not? To take is a mistake, right? Not trade unless it gives you any specific advantages. Right now, that would be just an exchange. There's no follow-up for white, no advantage that you gain as a result of that. Therefore, I'd say do nothing. Our bishop is already guarded, therefore we don't have to worry. Now, can you move to your opponent's side of the board and attack anything? Which are the moves that are available? Well, there are a few. You can jump with your knight. How about knight to b5? Is that an attacking move? By the way, I define an attacking move by a move that forces your opponent to defend. Therefore, in this case, knight to b5, although it hits the queen, therefore, like for a second, it is an attacking move. But realistically, black will just trade it off, and that's the end. So I wouldn't say that it's really an attacking move. It didn't really cause any need for black to defend. Therefore, I'd take this away. There's knight to c6, which is more interesting. We hit the queen. Plus, we open up this diagonal to attack their knight. So we may consider knight to c6. Is there anything else? There's bishop takes h7, which you may consider for a second, but it doesn't seem like there's anything, black just recaptures. So I would reject that. There's also f5, just trying to expand there on the king side and attack. And by the way, that gives you the plan. You see that we came to the plan without ever thinking about it, just by following those simple rules of thinking. Activate your pieces, find unemployment, and then look at your opponent's side of the board, how can I go there and attack something? So f5 would possibly allow us to expand there and to attack on the king side somehow. So that could be a nice plan. Therefore, in this position, it's a choice mainly between f5 and knight to c6. You choose these two moves, you just check them, whether one of them can give you an advantage. If one of them works, you just go ahead and play it. Very simple. If for some reason you see that like you lose something there, it does not work right now, what do you do then? well, then you just prepare your attack on the next move. If you can't attack right now, you prepare it. So you think, okay, how can I prepare my attack? Maybe I can leave the rook right here, right? It's a little bit longer, but anyway, that will strengthen the attack. So maybe something like this. And again, we also use the principle of the least active piece. We find pieces which are not doing anything currently, we think how to activate them. So chess basically is a very logical game. If you understand this simple process, you can follow it. In this case, I played knight to c6, hitting the queen, and there is only one square for the queen to go to, as it needs to maintain the guard of the knight. Therefore, queen needs to go to b6. And now, there's a little follow-up. I'll give you some seconds to try to find it. Please think about this. If you're solving tactical puzzles, that's what you usually have there. But now you can see how exactly you do that, and how you bring those tactical drills that you solve into real chess. Because the problem is, a lot of players solved hundreds, if not thousands, of tactical puzzles, but they hardly ever use those tactical shots in their own games. And now you can see how it actually works. It's about that idea of looking into your opponent's side of the board and looking at attacking moves. Checks, captures, and threats. So here, in terms of checks, there would be knight to e7 and bishop takes h7, and these are the two moves which we may consider. In this case, bishop takes h7 wins the game, because after king recaptures, there is queen h3 check, and whether the king moves here or here, in both cases, there is this sneaky checkmate with our knight. If you have any questions about planning, feel free to let me know. And if you want to have a complete blueprint for chess improvement and my help along the way, feel free to pick one of my premium courses at a massive discount, up to 70% for just a few more days. Click the link below the video in the description or somewhere on the screen, and I'll be happy to help. Either way, have a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.